There are secrets the world was never meant to remember, and this one was written in blood before it was buried in silence. What if I told you that the rejection of Jesus by the Jewish people wasn't about disbelief? What if it was about something far older, something woven into the fabric of a covenant so sacred that breaking it would mean the end of everything they were? The story you've been told is incomplete. The truth was sealed away, not by Romans, not by early Christians, but by those who understood what was truly at stake. Long before the cross stood on Golgotha, there was a promise made in fire and smoke on a mountain that still whispers its name across the desert winds. Mount Sinai. There, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob spoke not in parables but in absolutes. The covenant was clear, carved into stone, burned into the soul of a people chosen not for comfort, but for burden. They were to be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation, guardians of a law that would separate them from every other tribe on earth. This wasn't a suggestion, it was a binding, a metaphysical chain that linked their destiny to the divine will. And the law was explicit. No man could be God. No flesh could contain the infinite. To claim otherwise was not just heresy, it was annihilation. When Jesus walked through Judea, he didn't arrive in a vacuum. He came into a world electrified with expectation. The Messiah was coming. Every prophet had said so. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, they had all seen him in visions cloaked in symbolism and fire. But here's what the Sunday school version won't tell you. The Messiah they were waiting for wasn't a carpenter from Nazareth. He was a king, a warrior, a man anointed by God to shatter the chains of Rome, to restore the temple, to reign from David's throne and bring the nations to their knees before the God of Israel. He would be powerful, yes. He would be chosen, absolutely. But he would still be a man, a prophet, a son of David, not the Son of God in flesh. The rabbis knew the texts. They had spent lifetimes dissecting every letter, every stroke of the Torah. They understood what the Greeks and Romans did not, that the God of Israel was not like Zeus or Jupiter. He didn't have children in the mortal sense. He didn't incarnate. To suggest that God could be born, could suffer, could die, was to misunderstand the very nature of divinity itself. It wasn't that they rejected Jesus out of stubbornness. It was that accepting his claim would mean rewriting the entire covenant, dismantling the foundation of everything Moses had brought down from the mountain. And if Moses was wrong, then the law was a lie. If the law was a lie, then Israel had no purpose. And if Israel had no purpose, then God had abandoned them. That was the abyss they were staring into. But there's more. Something hidden in the texts that were left out. The Book of Enoch, for instance. It was revered by early Jewish sects, quoted in the New Testament itself, and then quietly removed from the canon. Why? Because it spoke of the Watchers, angels who fell and took human wives, creating the Nephilim, giants who corrupted the earth. It spoke of forbidden knowledge, of secrets taught to mankind by rebellious divine beings. And it spoke of a final judgment, a cleansing, where the line between angel and man, between divine and mortal, would be drawn in fire. The rabbis who read Enoch understood something terrifying. If angels could fall, if divine beings could corrupt, then the incarnation of God in flesh wasn't salvation. It was the ultimate transgression. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, hidden in caves for 2,000 years, there are fragments that reveal a sect of Jews who believed the end times were imminent. They called themselves the Sons of Light, and they were preparing for a war, not against Rome, but against the sons of darkness, against corrupt priests, against false messiahs. They had their own vision of the Anointed One, and it didn't match the man who overturned tables in the temple and spoke of turning the other cheek. They wanted a general, not a martyr. They wanted vengeance, not forgiveness, and when Jesus offered the latter, they saw it as weakness, as betrayal, as a distortion of the prophecy they had guarded with their lives. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, they were not villains in a simple morality tale. They were gatekeepers of a tradition so ancient it predated empires. They had survived Babylon, Persia, Greece, and now Rome. They had seen false messiahs rise and fall. Simon Bar Kokhba would come later, claiming to be the Anointed One, leading a rebellion that would end in rivers of Jewish blood. The rabbis had learned to be cautious. They had learned that the cost of following the wrong man was extinction. And so when Jesus stood before them, performing miracles, speaking with authority, claiming unity with the Father, they didn't see the Son of God. They saw a threat to the covenant, a crack in the foundation, a doorway through which chaos could pour in and devour everything they had protected. The gods didn't want you to read this, but now you hold it in your hands, and the question isn't whether they were right or wrong. The question is, what would you have done? The rejection wasn't a moment, it was a culmination. 1,000 years of preparation meeting a claim so radical it could only end in blood or transformation. And the world chose blood. But here's what they don't tell you in the sanitized versions, the ones that paint the Pharisees as blind and the crowd as manipulated sheep. The resistance to Jesus wasn't ignorance, it was knowledge. Deep, terrible knowledge of what happens when the boundary between God and man dissolves. They had seen it before, not in their lifetime, but in the texts that haunted their nights, in the warnings that echoed through their liturgy. The golden calf at Sinai wasn't just about idolatry. It was about mankind's desperate need to make God tangible, to bring the infinite down into something they could touch, control, worship on their terms. And God's response? Fire, plague, 3,000 dead in a single day. The message was clear. You don't get to remake God in your image. Now imagine that same people, descendants of those who survived that purge, hearing a man claim not just to speak for God, but to be God. To say, before Abraham was, I am. Those words weren't poetry to them. They were blasphemy so profound it shook the foundations of reality, because I am was the name God gave Moses at the burning bush. It was the unpronounceable, the sacred, the name so holy that even now, thousands of years later, observant Jews won't speak it aloud. And here was a carpenter, a man who ate and drank and slept, claiming that name as his own. The penalty for blasphemy wasn't negotiable, it was death. Not because they were cruel, but because they believed the very fabric of creation depended on maintaining that separation. The Talmud, compiled centuries later, contains fragments of the controversy, though much has been edited, sanitized, removed by later hands afraid of persecution. But in the oldest layers, there are traces. References to a man named Yeshu, who practiced sorcery and led Israel astray, who was hanged on the eve of Passover. The rabbis who recorded this weren't denying his power, they were categorizing it. In their cosmology, miracles alone proved nothing. The Torah itself warned that false prophets would perform signs and wonders to lead the people astray. The test wasn't power, it was alignment with the law. And Jesus, with his Sabbath healings, his challenges to ritual purity, his claim to forgive sins, a prerogative belonging to God alone, failed that test. Not because he wasn't extraordinary, but because extraordinary wasn't enough. There's a manuscript hidden in the Vatican archives that few scholars discuss openly. It's a fragment of a debate between a rabbi and an early Christian, dated to the 2nd century. The Christian argues that Jesus fulfilled the prophecies, that Isaiah's suffering servant was a blueprint for the crucifixion. The rabbi responds with a question that echoes through the ages. If your Messiah came to save, why did the temple fall? Why did Jerusalem burn? Why are your people still scattered? The prophecies spoke of restoration, of peace, of the lion lying down with the lamb. They spoke of a world transformed, not just souls saved. And when Jesus died, Rome still ruled. The temple still collected taxes. The poor still starved. From the Jewish perspective, nothing had changed. The Messiah was supposed to change everything. And if he didn't, then he wasn't the Messiah. It was that simple and that devastating. But there's a deeper layer still. One that touches on the mystical traditions that were already ancient when Jesus walked the earth. The Kabbalah, though formalized later, has roots that stretch back to the prophets, to the Merkabah mystics who sought visions of God's throne. They understood something that would later be called the problem of emanation. How does the infinite interact with the finite without destroying it? How does transcendence touch immanence without annihilating everything in between? Their answer was complex, a system of sephirot, of divine attributes that mediated between the Ein Sof, the infinite, and the created world. The idea of God, directly incarnating, bypassed all of that. It was like plugging a household appliance directly into a lightning bolt. The system wasn't designed for it. It couldn't hold. And the mystics who understood this saw the Christian claim not as fulfillment, but as category error, a fundamental misunderstanding of how divinity and humanity relate. Then there were the political realities. Judea in the 1st century was a powder keg. Zealots plotted rebellion in the hills. Roman soldiers crucified rebels along the roadsides as warnings. The temple priesthood walked a razor's edge, trying to maintain Jewish identity while keeping Rome satisfied enough not to burn everything to the ground. Into this walks Jesus, gathering crowds, speaking of kingdoms, overturning commerce in the temple courts. To the priests, he wasn't just theologically problematic, he was existentially dangerous. They had seen what Rome did to movements that got too large, too bold. The calculation was cold but clear. One man dies or the nation perishes. Caiaphas said it aloud. The Gospels recorded it wasn't cruelty, it was triage. And yet, thousands of Jews did follow him, not just the 12, but multitudes. They saw something that spoke to their deepest hopes. They heard echoes of Elijah, of Moses, of the prophets who had called Israel back to God when they strayed. The early church was entirely Jewish for its first years. Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles, was a Pharisee trained under Gamaliel, one of the great rabbis of the age. The split wasn't immediate or clean. It was a wound that took decades to fully tear open, each side claiming to be the true heir of Abraham, each side insisting they had the correct reading of the covenant. The tragedy is that both were sincere, both were operating from love of the God of Israel, both believed they were preserving rather than destroying. The Jews who rejected Jesus did so because they loved the law so much they couldn't bear to see it set aside. The Jews who accepted him did so because they loved the prophets so much they couldn't deny what they saw as fulfillment. And in that collision, something broke that has never been repaired. If you dare to seek what was written in the margins, what was whispered in the shadows of synagogues and churches alike, follow us. The forbidden archives are opening, and some truths, once known, cannot be unknown.